In your practical exercise, we need to do some preparations, and we need to install MySQL server on this virtual machine and MySQL Workbench. I think this is done already, but we may check that we have enabled all other software repositories available for our Ubuntu-based distribution, and it's done for me. Then we can update list of packages available on remote repositories. And then I can install MySQL server. Oh, and now what I see here is that in previous class, like half a year ago, MySQL Workbench was not available in the standard packages, and we had to do what normal Windows users do. We had to go to website of producer, download installation file, and then install it. But now what I see is that we have MySQL Workbench available as a standard package on these remote repositories. So instead of this Windows approach, we can use standard check. I will remove this previous one, which I downloaded from separated installation file download from their website. And so we can do sudo apt install MySQL Workbench community. It showed me, I think, because it's still remembered in cache about this Debian file. Yeah, so nothing has changed. So here we need to do Windows user approach. Go to website of developer, download installation file. So x86 means IBM PC compatible, like Intel and AMD processors, and 64-bit is probably only architecture which is still supported, and our distribution is based on Ubuntu Linux 20.04. And where is the difference between these two? It's here. I think we can download this normal. Oh, this is the debug package. I don't need to read more things. Yeah, we don't need that one, so we download Ubuntu Linux, this one. Don't need to sign up or log in. Here is smaller link which says no thanks, just start my download. And if you are optimist, you can immediately download it and open it with Package Manager. Today I will be optimist. And it even worked. So, when this is done, then we need to prepare our environment a little bit more. Standard way for latest versions of MySQL Server for authentication is following. That you have to be super duper root user to connect to the server. Like if you become super duper user, you write MySQL as a text oriented client for MySQL Server and you are in. But why they decided so? Because passwords tend to be insecure, and they decided that it is better. And of course it's better, for example, if you run something as a script, as a root user, you don't need to pass any password which may be intercepted to the server. What is not so good is that then our Java application should have super duper root permissions to connect to this server, which is not nice. And therefore we will create our own user. So to do properly, so you open terminal, you run MySQL, which is not server, it is text oriented MySQL client for MySQL Server, which is running. And to prove that it's running, I need to do this as a root permissions to show process ID as well. Now you see that here is MySQL D as a MySQL daemon running and listening on all on localhost addresses on port 3306. And when I run sudo MySQL, I escalate my privilege to root user and run MySQL text client for MySQL Server. And here we will create our own user. And here it's not so important which particular identifier you put, because when I will test on my environment, I still will use such user and will create if it's not created. But you may use your unique number here, what was given to you at the beginning of the class. I think this user is already created for me. and therefore it fails. I will test it and then exit. Then we need to create database schema or database design for this activity. We change current directory to our project src mine Java GTM activity 13. And then sudo MySQL again, and we create database with given identifier, or maybe it will be 00. It is already created for me, so probably these are also already created for me. So I grant all permissions on this database to user u00 at localhost. Then I flush privileges like flushing buffer to be sure that these privileges are protected exit from MySQL. And here with this command I also can check do my user has proper privileges and permissions, because here I now call MySQL from my current user, which is Valdis, but I pass username and password in command line, which is not very secure because it may be seen in history of commands, but if I'm only user it should be okay. So what I'm doing here, I run MySQL text oriented or console client, but to connect to the server I do not use current user with inherited privileges, but I use locally registered user in MySQL server called u00. -u means user and u00 means actual user, and -p means password, u00 means password, and database 00, and you should know what this redirection means. It means read instructions from this text file. And you may see this warning, using password and terminal lines in interface can be insecure, because if you look on history, here all these passwords may be seen for this user, but we don't care about this so much. And if you see something else than this warning, then something is not properly configured for your user or for your database or anything. And then for debugging purposes we will enable extended logging for our server on this virtual machine, that it will log all requests coming from clients to it. You shouldn't do this in production because it may slow your server considerably down and these logs may be very big, but for development and testing purposes that's okay. And we search for log entries here, and we enable general log and enable location for the general log here. And then we need to restart MySQL server to enable these settings. And then preparation part is done. Any questions or comments so far? one comment is too fast, what can you do? You will be able to replay this or previous record with slower speed, let's say 0.5, or if you download this file and use more feature-rich player, then of course you can choose whatever speed you like. Had to wait for download and install. Okay, we can wait for some minute. So you can. What do you mean? There was no any errors. There was just warning here when I executed MySQL console and I gave it username and password as a plain values for parameters here. So that's okay. And you could do it in the following way, which means use this user and use password, but do not give it here. And then it has this prompt enter password, and you need to write this password on dialog mode. And then you don't have this warning. But then of course you cannot automate it because then you have to give it in dialog mode. Yes. Let's go forward. And if we assume that environment is prepared, what we should be able to do? We should be able to connect to this database using fat-rich graphical client called MySQL Workbench, which is somewhere here, I think under development. Probably you do not have such entry here, but you may see something like this. So what do? You create new entry for connection to the MySQL server, and you can do it either somewhere here from menu, like manage connections and add new one, or here you can just have quick button here, MySQL connections, press on plus. And I will call it localhost because that will be server I'm be using. And username will not be root, but it will be my created user. And here you have different options to connect to it: standard TCP/IP, local socket pipe, which works if you connect actually to the localhost, and standard TCP over SSH is used when you connect to the remote server, because SQL protocol do not encrypt any data. So if you use SQL connection as is from your computer to remote computers, and everybody who understands SQL reads your data as open book. Therefore, for security purposes, usually MySQL servers are configured that they are listening only on this virtual localhost interface, so this database server actually is not reachable from the outside world. Remember that localhost interface can be reachable only from local process inside your computer. So if you have MySQL server, MySQL Workbench, other clients running inside your computer, you can exchange data through the localhost interface, but nobody can reach it from the outside world, like local area network or wide area network or whatever. And to connect to some remote server which is listening only in localhost interface, you do something like this if it's a server and this is your computer. First, you establish an encrypted SSH connection from your computer to remote server. And it is encrypted because this is the only way how can you exchange data using SSH. And then you run like MySQL Workbench and you send data through already established SSH connection to this server. So everybody who can look here on this connection somewhere here in the internet sees that there is encrypted SSH connection created between your computer and that server. But they do not know that actually inside this SSH connection MySQL client, in this case MySQL Workbench, is talking to MySQL server. So that's more details about these types of connections. So if you know that we are connecting it to the local host, then for speed you will not see much of difference. For small databases you can use local socket pipe to connect to the server. And you can test this connection, everything should be okay, and then you have saved it. And then you open this connection, and if you are curious what was inside this file for this activity, we can open OpenSQL script, workspace, activity. So here we see that it is text file, where in text there are different kind of comments and statements, and with this statement we create simple schema of database and also fill up it with few test data inside it, and everything here is written in SQL. And of course you can just execute it from MySQL Workbench as well if you like. So, and then you should see this database, some identifier here as your database. And if you used not 00 here, but something else, then when you will work it from Java, but that we will do this when we will go to the Java. You also have to update these settings in GTM test, so it package all tests here for database activity. Used user, used password, used database. So, and if you can connect to this database using MySQL Workbench, using known username and password, then you have checked with yet another tool that you can connect to this database and you can do something about it. And now, if we look on what we have to actually to do besides preparation is, we have to implement class called Teacher Manager. This class, and what this class does, this class converts Java world into relational world. Here we have class which describes teachers, and it has internal structure, integer ID, string first name, string last name. It has two different constructors. One which doesn't do anything, another which sets particular fields inside, values for this object, and list of getters and setters, and to string method. And this is just a Java object. If you would use very modern Java, this class actually could be so-called record, because that's what it is. Because all these other methods are actually just methods to handle these data structures. But for old school Java, we declare it as a class which has internal structure and methods, but all these methods are just related to getting data from and into these fields. But in Teacher Manager class, it is something like proxy between object-oriented Java and relational database. And what we have to implement here is different kind of methods which allows either store these teacher objects into relational database or to retrieve relational data from database and convert them back into teacher objects. So in general it means following. We have Java world with teacher class, and we have that would be poor Java. And then we have relational world, which I will call SQL world, which is not very precise because here it's about relations, not queries. Okay, relational world, where we have teacher data table, with some fields and values, and manager does following. It allows you to take teacher object and save it into table, or retrieve data of table and get teacher object back. So that's what this teacher manager does. And if we look on these methods, besides constructor, closing connections, such like utility methods or preparation methods, we need to implement all these CRUD operations: create, read, update, delete, for teacher objects inside teacher table and back. So I think I can close this one. So here we can look, for example, right click on table, select rows and limit. We see some test data here, or test teachers. And I will use this for debugging purposes to test how this exactly works, and it also may be very useful for you if you are not familiar with structured query language, because here when I did right click and select rows, limit to first 1000, I generated statement to search. So we need these CRUD operations, and for read we have following statement: select something, maybe with where, blah blah blah, but in general that's what we need. To create something, we can add some record here. And nothing has happened yet, it is just buffer for my client, but it will happen when I will say apply. And here it says what statement will be actually sent to the server. And this is the most verbose statement possible. it wraps up, at first it mentions database, second it wraps up with these, what are these called? Properly called grave accents, or accents, in jargon also backticks. With these backticks as delimiters, if either name of database or name of field or table here contains spaces, then it very ceremonially also shows a list of orders in which fields you will need to insert data, like identifier, ID, first name, last name, and then actual values. And also this number here is wrapped up in single quotes, apostrophes, even though for numbers it's not required. So it's very ceremonial, but it's safe. For example, if you do not know what kind of tables you will have there, etc., then you have to be ceremonial. So that's how we create something. If we want to update something, we can update it and press apply, and that will be our create read update statement generated. And then we can delete it, right click, delete, press apply, and this is our delete statement here. And this may help for us to be used as a template for all these statements what we need to do when we implement our teacher manager class. And apply. Now I think we can start looking into this teacher manager itself and gradually implement everything here. So first to do we have here is in the teacher manager constructor, and what we need to do, some design is already given to us, protected connection called con. When this teacher manager is created, we need to create connection to the database server. And this is suggested URL. This is suggested field for user and password. So to make it easily configurable, we will use user password database variables coming from all tests Java. And what I can do here, if I do not okay, let's do it one by one. So here we need to search for some templates because probably we do not know what needs to be done. And template of course is in your workspace, dots, presentations, GDBC here. So we need to create this connection, and we can use this example here, something like that. So we load dynamically implementation for MySQL server for this GDBC driver, and this variable is called con for us. Then everything here may throw exceptions, and I will not catch for separate things, I will catch any exception happening here. And then it suggests that URL actually should be a little bit better than that. So here for user I could refer all tests user and all tests password, but I again will not be afraid of static import. User password and later we will see we need also database blah 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 as well. And then I can refer to them just with simple names of variables. So with the static import I say that this simply named user variable actually refers to user variable in this class. And if we will try to run our local test here, let's implement some main method and create teacher manager. We see here that we have Java SQL exceptions at server, time zone value EST is unrecognized or represents more than one time zone blah blah blah. Why it's happening? Because MySQL server do not recognize what I have as my default setting Eastern European Summer Time, which is coming from regional settings that these are set to Latvian for me here. And how can I deal with that? I can say that server time zone is universal coordinated time. And I can also add these suggested things that I think that for latest versions of servers I don't need to say that encoding is UTF-8, I think it is by default, but to be sure we will add it here. So I have the settings and now when I run it, my connection is established, nothing is printed out as an error here. And for symmetry then, we can, not everything is done, so use database name for database, that will be later. Do not pass database into URL, I'm not passing, I'm saying connect to the server, but not specify, so here you can say like database 00 as a default, but we will not use it, because when JUnit tests are run, they reuse our created connection here and they actually drop this database before each new test is actually started. And then we need to set auto commit to false because we are required to use transactions. And now I think this first to do is done. And for symmetry purposes, we may implement close connection, which is very easy. And this may have to be wrapped up in try and catch, because it may also throw SQL exceptions. And if we are brave and we test our progress through the glasses of JUnit tests, something should be running here, I think. So you see, setup passes, close connection passes. So far everything is good, and this is another level of checks and tests to see that my configuration now is proper to connect to this database to which I connected using as a command line MySQL client or terminal MySQL client or text-oriented, call whatever, on MySQL Workbench, now I also have connected to this database using my Java code, my Java application. And now, what do we do next? If we do it with through approach, create, read, update, delete, then probably we have to start with create. But here is some problem. So usually when you implement these CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete, you may start with create, but it causes some problems, because to be sure that something is actually created, you need to search for it, because if it doesn't throw any exceptions or return any errors, it doesn't mean that this record was actually created. So usually what you have to do is following. You create it and then you search for it, was it created or not. Similarly, when you update something, you need to search for it, which means read, to check was it deleted or not. And when you delete, again search for it, shouldn't be searchable anymore. So even though this abbreviation is CRUD, usually only read is independent from other things, because all other operations, to be sure that they are working as expected, you have to implement search, which is abbreviated as read here, for these checking purposes. So therefore, to deal with these dependencies, we actually will start with reading. Fortunately to us, there are test data already inserted here, so we can check that some data are returned from this database and searching or reading actually works. Otherwise, if we would have completely empty database, our testing would be much harder. So, and therefore we will start with reading, and in general we have to do something like this. Let's search first. Find, easier would be find teacher by integer ID, and our template would be something like this. Only difference is that connection is TON with 2N. Then we need to probably import statement from JavaSQL. Not something like this, because here inside Java, only thing which is dependent on, and then everything should be wrapped up with try and catch. Because it may throw different kind of exceptions. Concretely here it is something like SQL exception. But if I don't care about particular exception, I can catch any exception here. So that's one thing. It could work, but our requirement here is that here in the JUnit tests, it also try to do injection tests. And therefore, instead of such a naive approach, which is prone to SQL injections, where we execute query and pass just string, we will implement everything properly using prepared statements. And that means that our code will be a little bit different. We need to create prepared statement before that. So instead of statement, we will use prepared statement. And then let's call it in short way something like this, and then we don't need that one. And we need to put something in placeholders. So this would be my template. To search particular teacher by its identifier. Now about details, I can go back to my saved templates and we actually need to prepare statement with following query. Not update, but select from, and here we dynamically say that it should be database and teacher table where ID is placeholder, and here is ID, and here we prepare this statement, and then how do we execute prepared statement? Call particular method, and what was method for result set object? No idea. Execute query. Check prepared statement, string, prepared statement, and then we do not pass any strings anymore. So one of mistakes you can also do here is execute query and pass some other string already. So this is different. If it's just statement, not prepared statement, you can pass a string here, but if you have prepared it and you added value in placeholder, then you just execute and you do not have any parameter here. And then let's say what fields do we have here? I do not know. First is identifier, another either name or surname, something like this. And we will try to execute it manually first. So we find teacher with ID 1. And you see, name is Mara. Something is actually working. If something doesn't work, here we can debug in real time what is happening in server. So that is here for extended logging. Sudo tail -f means check for updates for this log file. Okay, let's do it as a normal user because it starts with sudo. And we can clean it up. If your stupid terminal do not allow cleaning up, then you add nice to see delimiter here. And this built-in X-Face terminal, I think, do not allow. You can go through the menu, but it doesn't have hotkey. So, and then you can run it with your manual method and see that following things were logged on the server for this particular test. So here we have connected it. Some settings were set, auto commit to 1 by default, then auto commit to 0, and then select blah blah blah. What is not great here is that First, I do not return teacher, and second, I'm not committing my transaction. So somewhere here we have to say commit, and somewhere here I can say rollback, but this actually creates another exception, and we need to surround it with another try and catch block again. So this would be very ceremonial way for connection rollback. But if we are mostly interested about SQL and interaction with databases, we may ignore them, and what will happen is following, that if we are not committing this transaction, then this transaction will be rolled back after timeout on server anyway. So for nothing very bad will happen if you will not explicitly roll back this transaction, except we are testing our server on endurance. And for example, here in MySQL Workbench, there is another tab for this server, administration, and you can check what is entire server status here. For example, how many client connections do we have, and here something like performance reports. We may also see like state, and here you may see, I don't remember details, where you can see, for example, unfinished business inside these connections to these transactions. So, but as usual, if we pay our attention only to SQL itself, we will just leave it up to the server. And then we can also do some then we need to return actually teacher, where we find it by this ID. And ID should be unique. We should get only one particular record, and therefore we can do something like this. Get next result for result set, and then we can return new teacher, and here we say result text get as an integer, like I will be lazy, I will mention them by index. I don't remember. I think these were started indexed with 1. Get string for second field, and get string for third field. And of course, transaction commit should be before so here I'm creating new teacher object which will have appropriate fields inside it. And if I try to test it out with my manual test in main method, we see that we returned object, teacher object with values more at. And I think that, so we can check, do we need to return now? Here we need. What it is, I don't know. If teacher is not found, repeat object with 0 or null, so we need to do something different. So it means first we need teacher object, and as far as I remember, teacher object with 0 or no in its fields, we can use this constructor here, which does nothing. So we'll have teacher object created, but integer ID will be 0, first name will be null, last name will be null. And then we can say teacher is no teacher, and at the very end we return teacher. Now it looks more or less implemented. And if we are brave and we test the unit test, we see that this is even passing. Any questions or comments so far? I take that as a no questions and comments. Then I think we will still deal with read operations or search. And there's another search. What we need to find is find teachers by names. Where is... actually the test method is called just find teacher as an overloaded method, but instead of taking just one integer as parameter, it uses two strings as parameters. And business here is very similar, so I will shamelessly copy paste my code. Only difference is following, that instead of where ID, I have to search for pattern, like where. What are these fields? Fields are first name, last name, where, like, one thing, and question mark, placeholder. So instead of single teacher, we have to create a list of teachers. New, let's say, of teachers, because why not? Or if you like linked list better, we can use linked list. But then we need to import it. And we return this list here. And we need to put two different fields here, set string as a first manner. And in second placeholder we put last name. And here we probably will get, when we do pattern matching, we may get several results, so we can't just go to the next, but we need actually to do while. There is something to do here. We need to add to this list no teacher object, and not equals but add. And then that's not it, because here talk is about pattern matching. What is pattern matching? Pattern matching is to search for patterns First, no. What is wrong here? Yeah, that is problem. So, with pattern matching, you can search containing partial match for these strings. And there are two schools of thoughts. In general, you are not encouraged to search pattern matching starting with anything. Why? Because you cannot do indexed search. In this case, you have to go through all entire database, because when you sort, for example, all your indexes by name and surname, if you start with an exact specific character, you can do indexed search with optimization like divided by 2 of steps, which takes approximately logarithm of operations, logarithm of number of records of operations. But so that would be starts with A and starts with E. But in more modern user-friendly systems, you actually search everywhere here, because you rely on so-called paging. And paging means that if you start searching for A letter everywhere in this field and E letter everywhere in this field, this server will never go through entire database which contains millions or many thousands or whatever records. It will go through first so many rows, which is a default limit, and then if you will go to next page, it will go to next page, etc. So if you are using this paged browsing and you limit your search for some amount of rows, then this is not big sin that you actually go through entire database. And we will try to be user friendly. We will actually allow to search for characters everywhere in Word, even though it's not indexed search and it may be very slow. And here, remember that all preparation has to be done before you put this value inside placeholder. So you don't add any funny characters here in your prepared statement. Something like this. Everything should be prepared before you put it into placeholder, because here it always put as is. So our preparations has to be done following that. If we want to search for partial match everywhere, we do wrap it with these percent marks, which means everything in SQL, before we put these values inside these placeholders. So we will search for every record for this particular thing, and if I do manual testing here, we can, for example, search for A and E. Of course, these should be strings. And I see the same records are returned, so it looks like it should be working also for search of partial matches. So as far as I can tell, searching is implemented. And now let's start with C, or create, which is called, what is method called? Method is called insert teacher, and actually we have two different methods, string and teacher. Where is difference? Difference is following. I can create new record like this. Where's my apply button? Oops. So I can insert only these fields, and then identifier will be created automatically because this is primary key on server. Or if I know what I'm doing, I can say set all the fields by myself. Then I fill up all these things, and it even works. What I did say there, I think I didn't press revert. Because I have where condition, so it doesn't show up. And here it is. But of course, if I will do something stupid, I will get error here because this key 11 is not unique for this identifier. But we don't need to overthink this implementation. We assume that unit tests or everybody who will call these methods will know what they are doing. We just need to do this and either report success or report failure. So let's first start with this. Again, I'm copying code from here, but my template to create something is like this statement, which I generated with MySQL Workbench. And here, for you to have easier life, I will not be ceremonial. I will assume the database will not contain spaces inside it, so I don't need these accents here. So I will not add anything inside ID, because this will be this method. And here, I think this may be well. And I don't need to add semicolon at the end. So this is much less verbose, much less ceremonial insert statement. And here we need to set string in first, and that will be first name, value, and for second placeholder it is last name. And here, when we insert, we get result back how many records were created, and method for that is execute update. Not execute query. And it do not return statement, it return int status, or let's call it as is, it's actually rows. And in general, that's it, but we have not handled error conditions. Let's say false. And error condition something like this. If this was successful, it should return something like one record was created. And if rows larger than 0, status is true. And that error check should be after I commit this transaction. And I think something like this should work. Let's try it out. These are working. I will not test them anymore. Where is my log? Here. Here I have polluted log because of this monitoring for server status here. I will close that one. Move this to this workspace. And let's try it out first with my manual call. So it returned true. Insert into database teacher first name values la 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 blah blah blah. Looks good to me. If we refresh, there's fresh execute, and it is created. And if such manual test is working, then we may be brave and we try to also run it with JUnit test. And I think it is working. Insert teacher. One insert teacher is working. And other insert teacher is very similar. Only difference is we assume that caller who calls this method knows what he or she is doing, and all fields are actually provided. So we put something in ID, first name and last name, or if we do not want to be verbose and do it in native order, which it is, we can just say insert into these values. And here for placeholders we need to put, this is 1, 2, 3, and this is set. For large databases probably it should be long, not integer, because integer for large databases may be too small. It is 2 in power of 32. And here we have teacher object passed, teacher get ID, get first name, get last name, and everything else is the same. So if it fails and no rows were inserted because non-unique key was passed, that's their problem. We just return status as failure or false. No overthinking here, no searching for existing IDs or whatever, just try it. If it succeeds, succeeds. If it doesn't succeed, we need to report it properly with this boolean status here. And we can also test it out by ourselves. And what is wrong here? New teacher here. So we construct temporary teacher object and pass it here. Let's clean up our journal. Or you write something like this. Remember, here I'm still running this sudo tile-f and detailed log here. So first it returns true, second time it should return false, because there is such key already used, 22. Yeah, we print out stack trace of this exception and we return false. And this, I think, it means that JUnit test should pass. And as you can see, it even passes. So how much time do we have? We still have a little bit of time. Hopefully, as a proof of concept, we will finish it in working time. So next is update teacher. What should be similar to update teacher? I think insert teacher could be similar. So why it's similar? Because still it needs to return only true or false. For some reason here status is even declared here, so it's not cleaned up. And here, what do we need to do? We need to update this statement string for prepared statement, which is where it is saved here. And what can we update here if teacher is passed? Unique key is never changed for objects inside database, so we receive some kind of teacher. We have three fields here: identifier, first name and last name. And that means that what we need to do here is to update first name or last name, and we will even not care is first name changed or last name changed or whatever. But definitely we do not change identifier, because identifier is never changed. But we update, and here I will change it to database as a dynamic. I will not use backticks here. I will not use backticks here, because here, and no need to backtick here. Set and I just update both fields. First name set to something, last name. I'm not caring are these changed or not. I will just override them with new value with this identifier, where identifier is used to search for it and to use it as a unique key. So here we say get first name, get last name, and remember here ID is inside where condition, so this is last 1, 2. To put into placeholder. So update to this first name, to this last name, where ID is following. And for update, I think it also returns number of updated rows. We can double check it here. Update statement. Yeah, it returns number of updated rows. So if we have updated something, then that's good. We return OK. If it was not updated, then we just return false as a filer. And I think we do not have teacher ID, but we have, let's say, test 10. this field. That should return true, and this should return false because there's no such ID. Oh, I have error in my SQL syntax, so something is simplified. I think I did a mistake here when I update more than one field at a time. Let's double check it is here. So if I update several fields here, proper syntax is, comma is missing here. And I think where this in brackets are not required, it's ceremonial, but comma definitely should be there. So true in one case, false for another. If we refresh it, so here it is updated, and that record is not updated because there is no such record. And because I am satisfied with my manual tests, I may try to run automated JUnit tests as well. And it looks like it's passing. So now only last missing method is delete teacher, and delete, I think it also returns number of deleted records, so that means we can use this template like update teacher to delete it as well. Only difference is that we just set int here for ID, and it will be first and only placeholder, and proper syntax for delete teacher is something like this. And I will make name of database dynamic, but I will remove everything here which may be unneeded. And I think maybe that's it. So what do we have in database? We can try to delete like 5 and 500. And one case should be success and another case should be failure. True and false looks good to me. So, and when I run JUnit tests, everything passes to me except transaction commit. This is very strange because I'm using transactions. Of course I'm lazy, I'm not rolling them back, and I rely on server that it will roll it back after timeout because they were not committed. If you want to be nice, you need to add more code here to roll back them explicitly with all these error handlings there. I will not try to be nice here because we need to write quite a lot of code anyway. here. Why this is considered as unused import? That's strange. I'm using database. Okay, but we can remove something like array list and statement. This is a little bit strange. What happens if I delete it? Ah! It's somewhere here. Okay. So, I'm using transactions here properly, but I get some obscure problem here. Index out of bounds exception. Unfortunately, this is not very useful error, except this is something related to transaction commits. Fortunately, I remember some general details about these tests, and I remember some things about testing and databases in general. And you should know this as well. So we know the problem is related to transactions. And when question is when we need transactions, we can use transactions for all these CRUD operations. But how can we test them? We can test transactions like this. We create two different connections, let's say connection 1 and connection 2. And to test the transactions are working, we need to either create or update or delete something, and do not commit. This transaction, and if we do not commit this transaction, we could create another connection to it and read for it and check that until this transaction is committed, there is no change in my table. So here is my table, like teachers. I have either created or modified or deleted some row here, and then from other, this is what is this connection 1. From other connection 2, I'm searching for this to check are there any changes or not. So far so good. It should work, but problem is here that I have also using transactions for searches, find teacher C. I'm committing transaction, and for this I'm also committing these transactions. So what is happening, you should remember that transactions are more advanced features on top of synchronized resources. So, and they are locked, and what is actually happening here is following. If one of these threads are doing something and not committing transaction, this thread has locked, and in most cases it has locked entire table here. And this other test, for example, you do it after that, how to wait until this particular commit is committed, or the operation is committed, to get access to it. But if I also search for entire table and also use transactions, what it means that I have add lock to entire table just for searching purposes. And it is not very insane thing to do, because when you search for a very large table, like thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions record, definitely collecting all these records will have some time. And then if somebody is changing some record in between when you started and when you finish it, you may get garbled on inconsistent data because something was inserted, updated, deleted in between of this table. And what do? You also wrap it up inside transaction, and that means you add lock to entire table, and you do not allow to do any modifications for any changes during the search for this table. And there are systems and there are approaches which uses transactions also for searches, where you actually do not change anything, just to be sure that nothing has changed during this search when you are going from the beginning till to the end. But because of this lock, this means you actually cannot run JUnit tests in such way that you search for changes for unfinished transactions for modifications, because either you have locked the entire table for search or you have locked table for modifications. And therefore it is not done very user friendly here, but there should be some hint here. Actually, I think I have marked it, but I can double check. About child bootcamp. Bootcamp. This is activity 13. So, message here should be something like, please do not use transactions just for searches, because in this case JUnit tests cannot test them properly. Unfortunately, as it happens in real life, error messages are not always hints and not always explaining why this happens. And only thing what we know is that you should remember that, for example, when I worked in testing, etc., that you have very hard life to do test for something like transactions, etc., if even searches are blocking table inside transaction just for searches. And so there are two schools of thought. Another school of thought is how to test it, but if you do not allow to change something in the table while you are searching for these records, you still use transactions to lock this table. If you allow this, it's not so important in terms of statistics, calculations or whatever. You are not using transactions. And so, to deal with this, we will make our implementation less robust but more useful. We will not do transactions for this search, and maybe that will be enough. And if it's not enough, we will not use transactions for this search as well. And then everything is green, and you may check, for example, which search actually is used here. So you can use transactions when you search for a particular feature ID. It fails. So I think for both of these searches, transactions actually shouldn't be used, because transaction does two things. From business perspective, it ensures that you have consistent data, but internally, what is happening, you have to block access to these resources, that nobody else is changing them somehow, because that is only way how you can ensure that you have these consistent data. That's about ideas when you should use and when you shouldn't use transactions. And fortunately, we had enough time at least to demonstrate what you need to do here. And with that probably we can wrap it up. So, do you have any questions or comments about this? Okay, let's check it out. I'm not completely convinced about this comment. So, first you need to be consistent about your environment. So, what is easiest way for me to do? I will not replace anything. I will create user with x's here instead of numbers, because then I can just copy paste everything here. So I have created such user. Then I have to create such database where there is still x's instead of numbers. I have to grant all privileges on this database to this user, database xx to user xx, because that user will be used to delete that database, to recreate it, etc. And then I have to create initial scheme for this database. src minus java utl activity 13, and I should be able to execute such command, because in this command I'm using everything what I have created, this user with this password, with this database, and with this schema. And if I check it on my SQL Workbench, I see this database. And to double check, of course, I could also use this different user created to connect to this database. But as far as I can tell, such database is created. And now let's try it out. We use following user, following password, and following following database. Let's check it out. Where is my log here? What was the journal? Error log? No, I think query log. This may be some temporary issue. See here. Database, database, database. Where is beginning for that? this U00 doesn't look very good. Okay, so because here you are working on your own computer and there will not be any problems because we are only users for this database, you may redo all these settings for these default settings, what was U00, password U00, database 00. Maybe there are some issues about these public static final variables, and this is some kind of regression because definitely in previous class this weight ratio was working, and I just didn't catch after all this refactoring and reorganization of the project that actually these variables are not probably changing properly. I don't know. So safe approach is to use following, and if you have created more users and more databases, then of course these JUnit tests will just ignore everything what is not relevant for this user and password and this database. And of course on my physical computer I will have default values U00, U00 for username and password and database 00. And we can also check this. This is activity 13. And I will review them later. So, simple workaround is following. Deal with default values, and with default values it definitely works. If it works at all, of course. So, any other questions or comments?